How's it going, everyone? My name's Graham and welcome to Two Left Frames. Today I want to talk about one of my favorite films of 2019 and what I feel is one of the greatest disappointments of 2018. I'm not going to sugarcoat my opinions or hide my preferences here. I consider Rocketman to be the better of the two movies by light years. In every single way that Bohemian Rhapsody is safe and boring, Rocketman is stylistic and exciting. It's a genuine shame that Rocketman isn't getting the Oscars recognition that it deserves, but that's just a part of the Hollywood game and not something I want to put much stock in here. Patrick Willems made a video on musical biopics last year about how they all use a paint-by-the-numbers formula that should have died out after Walk Hard. Yet somehow Rhapsody hits every single mark and trope that movie lampooned and was praised for it? It's truly baffling to me. I highly recommend that video. Rocketman is not immune to tropes, but I think they were handled in ways that felt like they had something new and interesting to say about the out-of-control and largely unrelatable world of global superstars. Right from the opening moments, the framing device is used to set up each movie. Bohemian teases us with the payoff of their epic recreation of the Live Aid concert, a monumental performance, but not something that the movie is truly steering us towards. It's just kind of the moment when the movie ends. It's not like Freddie's entire life had always been leading up to that moment. Not even the short slice of Freddie's life we're given leads up to that moment. On the flip side, Rocketman begins with Elton in rehab, still in makeup and costume from a catastrophic performance. Immediately, we're introduced to a man who is lost and damaged. The journey of the movie will be one of abuse, depression, and recovery. So these two different entry points is already telling of the movies we're getting. Spectacle without substance, or a true character exploration that is ironically the far greater spectacle. Let's start comparing these two movies by looking at our protagonists, Freddie Mercury and Elton John, two of the biggest musical legends to ever live. It's important to distinguish the fundamentally different approach these movies took to these men's lives. Realism versus fantasy. One approach isn't inherently better, but in the context of these two movies, yes, one is notably better. Both movies are about queer frontmen performing in the same era, who are catapulted to superstardom and forced to bear the weight of a level of fame that human beings just generally aren't built to cope with. Long tours, late nights, and gig after gigs lead to an out-of-control life of drugs, alcohol, and self-destructive behaviors. A tale as old as time, right? It must be, based on the way Hollywood keeps doing it over and over ad nauseum. In Rhapsody, they wanted to give us the authentic Freddie, but we're too scared to give us any more than a man who was famous and lonely. We never get more than tame glimpses of his rock star lifestyle or the deeper struggles of his sexuality. This distilled, realistic version ended up feeling very dishonest, while Rocketman goes the opposite direction. Notice the tagline of the movie. Based on a true fantasy. While the story that we're being told is true, it's done in a way that exaggerates important moments and gives us a version that lives up to Elton's larger-than-life legacy. There was a willingness here to show his flaws and bask in the tragedies of his life. It may have been over the top, but it still managed to feel raw and real. Elton John is on record saying, "Some studios wanted to tone down the sex and drugs so the film would get a PG-13 rating, but I just haven't led a PG-13 rated life."
There's nothing wrong with success or pleasure. In fact, why am I apologizing for it, Mum? I have fucked everything that moves.
I can't discount or ignore the fact that Rocketman was made with the leading individual still alive and willing to share his story. Unfortunately, Freddie isn't here to tell his own story, and someone else had to make these decisions on his behalf. And I wish that they had recognized that we wanted to see that honest story. Show us Freddie Mercury's flaws and mistakes. Instead, their rise to superstardom feels incredibly easy and only has manufactured obstacles that never actually happened. Bohemian Rhapsody started development about a decade ago, and Sacha Baron Cohen famously left that production when it was obvious the movie's intent was to gloss over the more controversial aspects of Freddie's life and sterilize the overall portrayal. There are amazing stories about Freddie Mercury. The guy was wild. There are stories of little people with plates of cocaine on their heads walking around a party. But the band instead opted to downplay these elements, hoping to protect the band's legacy. Despite the two movies' differences in realism, this fantasy biopic approach may have actually given us the more honest movie in terms of themes, characters, and relationships. It's kind of funny that Rocketman was able to give such a realistic portrayal of a flawed artist through its fantastical narrative, while Bohemian Rhapsody's flawed artist became frustratingly fantastical in an attemptedly grounded narrative. I think that context and differences in approach are important to establish prior to the rest of this video. Some people may think the movies aren't comparable for that reason. But I disagree. There were still so many parallels between their lives, and the crux of these stories is, or at least should have been, the relationships Freddie and Elton had with those closest to them. Both of their rock star lifestyles inevitably push others away. Both had failed straight relationships, damaging closeted homosexual relationships, and both had friends or bandmates to support them at their weakest moments. Those are the foundations of a story that should exist beyond the movie's creative liberties, and I think how each was handled shows Rocketman's vastly superior approach to storytelling and filmmaking. Moving outward one step removed from the main characters, I can look at their closest friendships and relationships surrounding them. Bohemian followed some very well-worn roads of growing turmoil in the band, people not understanding Freddie's creative genius, abandoning him, and in the end resenting or pitying him for his depravity, with no real willingness shown to help. That divide in attitudes felt immediate rather than gradual. It's annoying to me because most of the difficulties between the band and Freddie were contrived for this movie. Anything I've read indicated that they got along great, professionally and personally. There was never a breakup. As if changing the timeline of Live Aid taking place after Freddie's diagnosis wasn't heavy-handed enough, that turmoil was inserted entirely to give us a cinematic reunion before the Live Aid concert. The real capper of these invented emotional highs and lows was squeezing in a healthy relationship for Freddie right before the big show. A nice young man who he can bring home to his parents. Oh, how sweet. Good for him. Yes, Freddie and Jim did start dating the year of the Live Aid concert, but they dumped it into the movie as an afterthought. It was just a random feel-good moment rather than anything meaningful, although that might speak more to the movie's awful pacing than anything else. There was such an eagerness to put a nice bow on everything and not leave audiences feeling too sad. The darkest before the dawn, the triumphant return, overcoming all odds, patching old wounds, acceptance rather than personal growth. All that stuff we all see movies for. Right? Herein lies the magic of Rocketman. The central relationship of Elton and his best friend Bernie is the heart of the movie, without the need for contrived conflict. The entire perspective taken in this movie is that these two are inseparable and are always there for one another. There was always acceptance, but it was only truly recognized through personal growth. As Elton slips further and further away, Bernie is always there to try to lift him back up. Anytime the two fight in the movie, they immediately apologize and share a complete understanding of one another. There's no mid-movie separation that needs to be patched back up. Any turmoil there was Elton's fault, and Bernie understood that, knowing none of his friends' actions were unforgivable. The dynamics of this relationship feel real, never forced, and are infinitely more enjoyable than watching grown men bitch and fail to support one another. And by the film's end, rather than quickly wrapping up loose ends and without pretending to give closure, Elton instead realizes that he doesn't really need his parents after all, and that maybe there's more personal growth lying in front of him. That was a real breath of fresh air, one I didn't realize I needed from the usual predictable Hollywood. Not every plot thread needs or deserves a happy ending. Showcasing a bittersweet resolution where he leaves some people behind is what this movie needed instead. And as a more general side note, supportive male relationships are not commonly portrayed, not with this level of care and affection, even less so a platonic friendship between a gay man and his straight friend. I know white men don't need more representation on screen, but those types of relationships do. And something Bohemian Rhapsody failed to grasp is that those interactions and friendships being more true to the real world actually makes for a more compelling watch. The characters and their story feel so much more real.
I'll write the fucking lyrics, Bernie! Let me deal with the rest.
Sorry.
I know.
It's just more true to the real world. Moving forward, Bohemian shows Freddie push people away, and them proceeding to distance themselves with almost no resistance. He became a rich loner who was sad about being a rich loner so quickly that it was almost impossible to feel sorry for. In Rocketman, those closest to Elton worked to help him through everything as best they were able. Watching Elton struggle, suffer, and push people away was gut-wrenching to watch. Elton's own resistance to love and affection is the conflict of the movie, not some made-up high school drama. Do you remember in high school learning about things like man versus man, man versus society, and man versus self? It's simple storytelling building blocks, and there's absolutely no reason to force a story to be man versus man when there's a much stronger man versus self story waiting there. I cared so much about Elton John and his friends and wanted everyone to help one another and just get along. Maybe I'm getting a little harsh here, but I think they made Freddie into a one-dimensional crybaby and Elton into a well-rounded, flawed man who is much more deeply relatable. Someone who we can all empathize with. someone who doesn't come across as spoiled and who you want to succeed. One of the strongest examples I can give when comparing what I love and hate about the two movies is how they showcased their straight relationships with women. Freddie acting clingy and hovering around Mary was generally one of the stronger through lines of the movie because that dependency of the relationship gave real insight into Freddie's fragility. But they didn't always hit the mark while trying to communicate that. It was incredibly important to the story they were telling to show us that Freddie did genuinely love Mary in a healthy way to begin with. This is something they should have gone far deeper with, instead only properly exploring it in this one scene.
I think I'm bisexual.
Freddie, you okay?
It shows how limiting and incompatible labels can be. It's very significant to have someone tell Freddie he's wrong the one time he tries to assign a label to himself. The movie very nearly had something important to say in this moment and quickly moved on without properly exploring anything of value. Instead, what we're treated to often makes the nature of the relationship awkward, pathetic, and quite desperate. It really is a shame because that was a perfect opportunity to really show us a previously unknown side of Freddie and make this larger-than-life character a little more relatable. I keep using that word, but that's because it's important. In a 2-hour movie, you want to relate to your main character. Now, the real Freddie did love Mary unequivocally, but I think it was a disservice to that relationship to make Freddie so obsessive and dependent. Or maybe they could have swung that angle if they didn't make Mary out to be so off-put by it. On the other hand, one of my favorite sequences in Rocketman, something I think about on a regular basis since I saw the movie a year ago, is Elton's own straight marriage. Wedding to divorce is only a few minutes across a couple of scenes. This scene in the kitchen where Elton is beginning his day with a glass full of vodka, the palpable tension, and devastating realization of this mockery of a partnership is so incredibly moving. As this plays out, no one says a word, and it just speaks volumes. Elton is in the throes of addiction, but we're given the sense that he is truly remorseful. We don't learn much about their specific relationship, but that's okay. The purpose here should be to reflect back on our protagonist and teach us more about them and their struggles, not guilt-tripping you into feeling sorry with this sad puppy routine. The feeling with Elton was a much more genuine cry for help from a lost man who is trying his hardest. Now, this next bit is a bit touchy to unpack. How Bohemian Rhapsody handled homosexual relationships is something that borders on insulting. The movie shies away from it in a way that doesn't appear to reflect any personal turmoil or angst felt by Freddie. It's not stuffed away as a product of his own concerns or misplaced feelings of shame. It instead reeks of stuffy producers not wishing to offend the general audience. Rocketman received a lot of praise for this, but honestly it didn't go as deep into this aspect as it could have, and reporters way over-exaggerated the importance of this gay love scene where Egerton and Madden made out. Yes, that's important to have in a movie, especially one where your lead character is gay, but when we had movies like Moonlight and Call Me By Your Name so recently, it felt odd what a big deal people were making of this. But I guess when Bohemian so clearly balked at the inclusion of real homosexual intimacy, it's sad that we'll settle for even these brief moments as being adequate representation. Elton's sexual discovery was one of liberation, embracing who he is, while even late into the movie, Rhapsody seemed to wrap Freddie's sexuality up in secrecy and shame. Inclusion of a gay love scene like this is definitely in the right direction, and I think Rocketman should be applauded for pushing that forward rather than hiding from it. Now, I tried to focus on the writing and storytelling of the characters so far, but now I'd like to look at the actual acting, bringing these two icons to the big screen. Many of the other points I've made so far, I believe, are more the faults and successes of scripting and directing. Talking about the actual performances, I still prefer Taron's portrayal of Elton over Rami's version of Freddie, but both had merits. Malek had some great physicality, which really shone all the more when we entered the mustache era, and his performance benefited from the two looking much more similar than earlier in the movie. This was especially wonderful during the Live Aid performance. I really felt that energy and thought he captured Freddie's essence wonderfully. But I believe the problem here is that it almost boils down to an SNL impression. Rami is able to perform flawlessly when he had a blueprint of exactly how to act and move. Overall, I really liked his flamboyancy and movements throughout the movie, but I never really felt Mercury's true charisma was present. Certainly nowhere near the level he was able to attain in scenes like this where he's simply able to recreate some reference footage. I think if you're taking the approach of 100% accuracy, you simply have to embody the character much more deeply than he did. One of my favorite examples is Daniel Bruhl as Niki Lauda in Rush, or more recently Charlize Theron as Megyn Kelly in Bombshell. Everything about their performance in every scene completely transforms them into those real people. I think Malek gave a serviceable performance, but specifically capturing Freddie Mercury, I think it came up short. Honestly, I blame the script's unwillingness to explore Freddie on a deeper level. I believe Malek did the best with what he was given. As Sacha Baron Cohen said when he left the project, Brian May is an amazing musician, but not a great movie producer. I really respect Elton's willingness to step aside and let other creative people do their thing. He makes music, not movies, and he was comfortable giving them that freedom. This again really separates the two movies on a fundamental level. I would say Taron's version of Elton is even less accurate than Rami's Mercury, the difference being that that was never their intention. But in terms of performance and what was asked of the actor, I far prefer Egerton. The movie is giving us a character more so than a real person. The advertisements all touted Taron Egerton is Elton John. This is not an impression, it's an interpretation. The representation and communication of Elton's essence is much more important than looking and sounding like him, which yes, were done very well, but that's really just there to help pull us in to begin with. I believe that's one of the great successes of this movie. It provided a level of freedom for Taron to take the script where it needed to go without being limited by a stilted attempt at an impression. This doesn't even get into the actual singing, but I think that's something else entirely, since there isn't anybody alive who can both act like Freddie and convincingly capture his true range and style. So in a sense, maybe that was never a possibility for that movie, but largely I'm going to save the musical performances for a little bit later.
And a cool factoid that links all this together, showing the real-world friendship as well as the trust shared between this musician and actor. Allowing Taron to embody him fully and portray that legacy is brought full circle with the audiobook of Elton John's autobiography. He read the introduction to that book himself, but actually handed it over to Taron Egerton to read the body of that work. It really is amazing seeing that intergenerational respect that these two have for each other's craft. It just warms my heart to see it.
Following the same structure as when I was looking at the actual writing of these characters, I now want to look at the cast beyond the big two. Bohemian Rhapsody did an amazing job of finding lookalikes. Gwilym Lee is a spitting image of a young Brian May. Really, the accuracy of that almost detracted from Malek as Mercury, and made their differences more glaringly apparent. Other than that, Mike Myers was there as a fictional character spouting made-up movie trope BS.
Mark these words, if they're not careful, by the end of the year, no one will know the name Queen.
Yeah, that character doesn't exist and that never happened. For Rocketman, look no further than Tate Donovan as Doug Weston. This blew me away. That man gave us a Best Supporting Actor performance with next to no screen time. From the first second he stepped out, he burst in, popped off the screen, and stole the entire scene, and left me feeling like I now knew more about Doug Weston.
They just flew in from England, and boy, their arms are tired.
I mean, sure, he was an influential nightclub owner, but I shouldn't feel like I know that character more intimately than literally any member of Queen. Not every real-life human has personalities that large, but I still think that is a serious flaw of Rhapsody's. Or how about John Reed, the only common character between the two movies, kind of funnily portrayed in each by Game of Thrones alumni, but their roles in each movie were completely different, so it does somewhat feel like apples to oranges. Richard Madden showed us an entirely new range of his, playing a vindictive, manipulative, business-driven asshole. Sure, he has more screen time and emotional weight to work with, but the only thing I can tell you about Aidan Gillen's version is that he was the guy who was in this scene. I said I wouldn't dwell on the Oscars, but let me take one goddamn minute to talk about editing. This atrocity was nominated for Best Editing? Did the last 20 minutes make everyone forget the rest of this movie? Yet we aren't going to acknowledge a beautiful, captivating, and unique piece of cinema like this? That alone should prove to you that while the Oscars are fun, we definitely shouldn't put any stock into who actually receives nominations or who wins. Nominations do not magically make a bad movie good, and snubs do not lessen the strength and successes of good movies. While I'm here, I'm going to stretch that umbrella beyond editing and talk about the filmmaking at large. I feel like I'm really acing these segues. These are both movies, yes? That's not up for debate. Scripted, planned, cinematic experiences used to communicate a story. We're all familiar. Then why the hell was Bohemian filmed like it was a live performance DVD? If that's what they were going for, then I truly don't see the purpose of this movie even being made. What a boring, uninspired way to make a movie. Oh, we need a hot new song to get some audience participation? What if we did this simple thing? Jump cut to it being top of the charts and then performing it to swarms of adoring fans. This is how the movie handles almost every single song's creation. It took no effort to write, was an instant success, and then we get to spend a few minutes watching them perform it with no context other than it's a great song and people loved it. Yeah, we know. This is the least interesting part of these songs in a visual storytelling medium. I've spent many hours of my life watching recorded Queen performances on YouTube. I didn't think I was paying to see one of those Paul Rudd and Jimmy Fallon music video recreations. Why does the movie exist if the movie is just a soundtrack? I won't pretend that Rocketman gave us a much better insight into the actual writing process, but the most special thing that this movie does is give the songs context. To some extent how they were created, but much more importantly, how and when they're used in the movie. While the circumstances were not always 100% historically accurate, we can follow a thread of inspiration to creation. Based on the events surrounding each performance, each song is completely recontextualized. And rather than just putting someone up on a stage and recording them, we are treated to a wonderfully over-the-top musical-style performances with full choreography and wild sets and exciting, vibrant editing and costumes. Even the small moments where Elton is on stage, it's filmed in a way that emphasizes what a monumental moment or turning point that performance was. I started making a list of the different moments I loved during different renditions of the songs in this movie, and I quickly realized that I had several things I loved about each and every performance. Every song is treated with such reverence. Can you remember when, where, and why in Bohemian Rhapsody Queen performed Another One Bites the Dust, Killer Queen, or I Want It All? No? Was it because they were all filmed in the same way and nothing in the movie made their inclusion significant other than cutting a hype-based trailer and selling soundtracks to people who were already fans? When I listed those 3 songs, did you realize I Want It All isn't even in the movie? Sorry for that little switcheroo, but the utilization of music in Bohemian Rhapsody was so frustratingly lazy. They somehow made Queen's music feel unimportant. Rocketman was a musical, something I honestly didn't know I wanted from a musical biopic until now. That union of styles really should have been more obvious. And what better artist to attempt that with than Elton John? Everything is reworked and arranged in a unique way to tell a story, rather than just a greatest hits compilation with no real context or intent behind each song's inclusion. It also had a willingness to go beyond Elton's greatest hits. There are actually several songs in the movie I had never heard before. We were given beautiful new renditions and performance pieces to match the classics thanks to the brilliantly talented Taron Egerton, and we're introduced to a less familiar side of Elton's incredible discography, let alone the fact that it gave us an amazing new song that serves as a duet, really driving home that genuine connection between Taron and the real Elton John. Those real performances add so much to the movie, but I really saved them towards the end of the video because I think having an actor who can do those songs justice serves as a bonus to Rocketman's accomplishments rather than a shortcoming of Bohemian. I know how hard that is to pull off. It's simply a cherry on top and a wonderful full circle celebration of Elton's career. Both movies had the difficult task of trying to tell their complete stories of these men's lives in the span of only a few hours. That is never an easy task, and it's why I appreciate atypical biopic formats like Aaron Sorkin and Danny Boyle's Steve Jobs. But despite that challenge, Rocketman actually managed to arrange real-life events and musical numbers in a unique and thrilling way that managed to tell a contained yet still complete story of Elton John's life, while unfortunately Bohemian Rhapsody just sort of had cosplayers read a Wikipedia page with a greatest hits compilation acting as a weak adhesive for it all.
One benefit of moving this video over to a new channel well over 2 years after its original upload date is that I can give it a director's cut, clarifying and expanding on a few points I originally made, benefiting from feedback left by some lovely viewers in the comments. So first off, thank you for that, and I can now tie in Elvis into this conversation. I don't want to recut the entire video to address it fully, but it feels worth a mention. Obviously, it had a lot of similarities in subject matter, themes, and presentation. And there was some truly insane, full-on Lerman-style choices going into the filming and editing of this that I genuinely enjoyed. There are a few key scenes that have stuck with me months later. But the last chunk of the movie in Vegas is twice as long as it needed to be, really needlessly beefing up the runtime, and the movie made the confusing choice of making it seem like the black community was grateful to Elvis for appropriating their music. But for its faults, it was bold, bright, engaging, and worth watching for the phenomenal, transformative performance from Austin Butler. He likely gave the most convincing, respective impression of any of these three actors. That's, however, somewhat undercut by Tom Hanks giving one of the worst performances of his career. He just failed to keep a consistent accent for 2 consecutive sentences. His character was, however, very well written, so at least it's not unwatchable. I liked it a hell of a lot more than Rhapsody, but still less than Rocketman. Overall, I would recommend it. Just strap yourself in for that excessive runtime.
It's kind of cheesy, but I want to round out this video by straight up thanking everyone involved in making Rocketman. Taron's performance, paired with the rest of the creative team, gives us a new piece of art to enjoy. I've been listening to Elton's real discography and this new soundtrack on such a regular basis for the last year. It really reinvigorated old and new loves for Elton's music. In combination with the film, it gives the songs a whole new meaning and perspective through which to enjoy them. Rocketman as a movie can serve as a tribute and true companion piece to Elton's work and career. It's fresh, celebratory, honest, and a movie that I think should serve as a new blueprint for musical biopics. Outside of notably recreating the Live Aid performance to a T, Bohemian Rhapsody didn't really make me feel anything, or provide me with anything new, meaningful, or insightful, and it literally drained me to watch it a second time. Luckily, I rewatched them in the order I first saw them, so Rocketman was back to save the day. It manages to capture all the best elements of music videos, soundtracks, stage performances, and musicals, doing things through the music, choreography, and editing that would only work as a movie. This movie gives me joy, sorrow, compassion, heartache, fantasy, and whimsy. I love this movie so much, so please, if you haven't already, go watch Rocketman, and then go tell your best friend you love them. This video was brought to you by me. I have no sponsors at this time. So instead I'll just say thank you for watching this video. I tried to not be too whiny or complainy, but I'm very opinionated about these 2 movies. Hopefully I didn't let it get the better of me.
I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard, but I've actually always had kind of a fondness for this video. I'm really happy with how it came together. I don't do essay stuff all that often. I much more often do just kind of general reviews or broad sweeping analyses, but I'm really excited to have this live in a home that's kind of dedicated to TV and movies while having the opportunity to make some slight tweaks to this video. So if you're interested at all in hearing more of my thoughts on all things movie and TV related, then please consider subscribing, give things a like, a comment, all that jazz that you're used to. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.